History isn't just words on a page, it's a living, breathing adventure. With each turn, we step closer to the moments that shaped our world. From ancient whispers to revolutionary roars, we witness the triumphs and struggles that defined humanity. This is more than a journey through time. It's a chance to walk in the footsteps of giants. Are you ready to turn the page? Passport Chronicles.
In the year 541 CE, a mysterious plague struck the Byzantine Empire. At its peak, it claimed up to 5,000 lives per day in Constantinople alone. Streets piled high with corpses, the economy collapsed, and the empire itself nearly fell apart. This was the Justinian Plague, one of the deadliest pandemics in history. In the middle of the 6th century, the world was dominated by one superpower, the Eastern Roman Empire. Under the ambitious Emperor Justinian I, its borders stretched from Italy to the Middle East, a realm of immense wealth, military might, and cultural brilliance. The capital, Constantinople, was the largest and most sophisticated city on earth, the heart of a vibrant, interconnected empire. But this very connectivity, the source of its strength, would soon become its greatest vulnerability. The story of its downfall begins not on a battlefield, but in the mud and heat of a port town, Pelusium in Roman Egypt. For centuries, this region had been the breadbasket of the empire, its fertile lands producing the vast quantities of grain needed to feed the million souls in the capital. This supply was managed by the Annona, a colossal state-run operation that was a marvel of ancient logistics. Every year, a great fleet of ships would set sail, their holds filled with the promise of sustenance. But in the year 541, they carried something else. Hidden within the grain were stowaways, a common nuisance on any voyage, black rats. And on those rats, another, more sinister passenger, the oriental rat flea, host to a deadly bacterium, Yersinia pestis. Unknown to anyone, these humble grain ships had become floating incubators. The rats, confined in the dark, warm holds, provided the perfect breeding ground for the fleas. As the rats died from the infection, the now starving fleas would seek new hosts. The sailors on board would have been the first to fall, their sudden violent illness a terrifying mystery. When the fleet arrived in Constantinople in the spring of 542, it brought not life, but a plague of biblical proportions. The contemporary historian Procopius, an eyewitness to the horror, wrote that it began with a fever. But this was no ordinary sickness. Soon victims developed grotesque swellings, the infamous buboes, in their groins, armpits, and behind their ears. Some fell into a deep coma, others were seized by a violent delirium, tormented by visions and paranoia. There was no cure, and for most, no hope. At first, the deaths were few, but then the numbers began to climb exponentially. From the docks, the disease exploded into the densely packed city. It moved with terrifying speed, from house to house, district to district. The city's advanced infrastructure, its public baths, forums, and markets, now served only to accelerate the contagion. Panic gripped the capital. The systems of law and order broke down. At its peak, Procopius claimed the death toll reached 10,000 people a day. The city ran out of room to bury the dead. Bodies were stacked in the streets, then loaded onto barges and cast into the sea. From his palace, Emperor Justinian watched his glorious capital transform into a charnel house. He issued edicts and organized burial details, but the tide of death was unstoppable. The plague made no distinction between rich and poor. It even struck the emperor himself. Though Justinian would miraculously survive, he was forever changed, ruling over a shattered empire. By the time the imperial court truly grasped the magnitude of the catastrophe, the city was already lost, and Constantinople was only the beginning. The plague did not stop at the city walls. Riding the arteries of trade that had made the empire rich, the contagion spread like wildfire. Port to port, town to town, it moved along the same sea lanes and Roman roads that carried soldiers, merchants, and tax collectors. From the heart of the empire, it radiated outwards, reaching Syria, Anatolia, Greece, Italy, and Gaul. Entire cities were hollowed out, farmlands abandoned. This was more than a disease. It was an event that would sever the ancient world from the medieval one. The dream of a restored Roman Empire died in the plague pits of Constantinople. This was the first devastating strike of a pandemic that would return in waves for 2 centuries. a catastrophe that would forever alter the course of history. The onset was terrifyingly swift and without warning. A person could feel perfectly healthy at sunrise, only to be seized by a sudden, violent fever by midday. This wasn't a common illness. It was an aggressive internal fire, accompanied by debilitating chills that shook the body to its core. To the people of the 6th century who had no concept of germ theory, it was as if an invisible demon had taken hold, its arrival marked by lethargy and a profound sense of dread. Then came the plague's most infamous sign, the buboes. These were grotesque swellings of the lymph nodes, appearing most often in the groin, armpits, and neck. They were the body's fortresses, being overwhelmed by an unseen invader. Initially the size of a lentil, they could swell to the size of an apple, hard and excruciatingly painful to the touch. As the tissue within died, the buboes would turn dark purple, then black, a grim portent of the body's surrender and a terrifying visual marker of the disease. But the buboes were just one manifestation of the horror. For many, the fever brought on a violent sickness, with victims vomiting uncontrollably. The mind, under assault from the high temperature and toxins, would often break. Eyewitnesses described vivid hallucinations, of victims seeing ghostly apparitions and believing they were being pursued by demons. This was the bubonic form, a grim battle for survival that played out in both the body and the mind. There were worse fates. In the septicemic form, the bacterium bypassed the lymph nodes and went straight into the bloodstream. Death could come within hours, sometimes before any buboes even had a chance to form. The only outward sign might be the terrifying darkening of the skin, as gangrene set in on the fingers and toes. A third, pneumonic form, attacked the lungs directly. This was the most contagious, spreading through the air with every bloody cough, turning crowded city districts into inescapable death traps. The physical agony was matched by the psychological terror. Some victims, consumed by delirium, would run wildly through the streets until they collapsed from exhaustion. Others fell into a deep coma, a deceptive peace that almost always preceded death. They would lie unresponsive for days, while their families could only watch and wait for the inevitable, powerless in the face of the disease. To witness a loved one transform from a vibrant person into a suffering shell was a profound trauma for the survivors. The contemporary historian Procopius documented this nightmare in Constantinople with chilling clarity. He noted the utter helplessness of the physicians, whose traditional remedies were useless against this new scourge. They couldn't understand why some people survived while most perished. He wrote, "There was a pestilence by which the whole human race came near to being annihilated." His words weren't hyperbole. They reflected the sheer scale of the catastrophe unfolding before his eyes. Other writers recorded the same fear, loss, and the complete collapse of daily life. Fear shattered social bonds. The sick were often abandoned by their terrified families, and the dead were left unburied in the streets. These harrowing first-hand accounts, etched onto parchment amidst the chaos, are more than just historical records. They are testaments to human suffering on an unimaginable scale, and their survival would shape how all future generations understood the terrifying power of a pandemic. By the spring of 542, Constantinople, the jewel of the empire, was overwhelmed. With up to 5,000 deaths a day, bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. Mass graves overflowed, and desperate officials dumped corpses into the sea. The city watched its own lifeblood wash away. Even Emperor Justinian himself fell ill. Though he miraculously survived, his empire would never be the same. The crisis reshaped politics, economy, and daily life. The plague did not remain confined to Constantinople. It was a passenger on the very trade routes that were the lifeblood of the empire. From the grain ships of Egypt, it sailed to every major port in the Mediterranean. It spread inland, following Roman roads into the heart of Italy, Gaul, and Spain. To the east, it marched with armies and caravans into the Sasanian Empire in Persia, devastating Justinian's primary rival. Incredibly, evidence suggests its tendrils reached the remote fringes of the known world, from isolated monasteries in Ireland to, some scholars argue, the distant lands of China, a testament to the surprising interconnectedness of the ancient world. The total death toll is difficult to comprehend. Modern historians estimate that between 25 to 50 million people perished, a staggering figure that may have represented a quarter to half of the world's entire population. The range is wide because the administrative structures that would count the dead collapsed under the strain. In the capital, The contemporary historian Procopius wrote of a city in utter despair, where at the plague's zenith, the death toll surpassed 10,000 people each day. At first, burial rites were observed, but soon, the cemeteries overflowed. There was no one left to dig graves, no space to put the bodies. People were sealed in their homes to die. The dead were left in the streets. In a desperate measure, authorities began filling the cavernous towers of the city walls with corpses, creating macabre makeshift mausoleums. The stench of death hung over the once glorious city like a shroud. The social fabric, woven from millennia of tradition, law, and custom, unraveled in a matter of weeks. This urban catastrophe was mirrored in the countryside. With farmers and laborers dying in their fields, harvests were left to rot. The agricultural engine that fed the empire's cities sputtered and died, triggering widespread famine that killed many who had even survived the plague. The intricate system of supply broke down completely. Food shortages became rampant, and the price of grain skyrocketed beyond the reach of the common citizen. Once vibrant towns and villages fell silent, their populations wiped out, their homes left to crumble. Entire regions were effectively deserted, reclaimed by nature. The consequences for the Byzantine state were immediate and catastrophic. Emperor Justinian's grand ambition to reconquer the lost Western Roman Empire was dead on arrival. His armies, already stretched thin, were decimated by the disease, recruitment ground to a halt. The empire's tax base evaporated as taxpayers died and economic activity ceased. With no money and no soldiers, the frontiers became dangerously vulnerable. The plague had done what no barbarian army could. It had hollowed out the empire from within, leaving it weakened and exposed for centuries to come. The demographic shock echoed for generations, creating a vacuum that would not be filled for 2 centuries. This long-term depopulation fundamentally altered society. It triggered economic stagnation, but also, paradoxically, increased the value of surviving laborers. Psychologically, the plague left an indelible scar. Many interpreted the inexplicable horror as divine punishment, leading to a surge in religious fatalism and a turn away from the rationalism of the classical world. It was more than a public health crisis. It was a civilizational turning point. The Justinian Plague didn't just kill millions, it killed the ancient world itself, closing a chapter of human history and violently ushering in the dawn of the Middle Ages. Some historians argue the Justinian Plague changed the course of history. The weakened Byzantine Empire struggled to hold its territories. This opened the door for the rise of Islam in the 7th century, reshaping the political and religious landscape of the world. Others believe the plague delayed Europe's recovery from the fall of Rome by centuries, setting the stage for the Middle Ages. In many regions, the social and political landscape was irrevocably altered. Today, scientists believe the Justinian Plague was caused by Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium that later caused the Black Death. DNA analysis of ancient skeletons has confirmed its presence, but some researchers argue the Justinian Plague behaved differently, more aggressive, with waves of recurrence for 2 centuries. Was it truly the same disease, or an ancient strain now lost to history? The Justinian Plague teaches us that pandemics are not new. They have shaped civilizations for millennia. Through survival, humanity endures. The empire weakened, but it did not vanish overnight. The Justinian Plague remains a chilling reminder that history itself can turn on something as small as a flea. And yet, through survival, humanity endures. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of history. And tell us in the comments, do you think the Justinian Plague changed the world more than the Black Death?